Hey everyone, I'm Ed. I'm the co-founder of Hustle Badger. We provide super practical advice and support for product managers. And today I'm going to talk about how to become a head of product. So all of this advice is stuff I've given to other people or I've kind of developed myself going through this. Before I set up Hustle Badger, I had a number of leadership roles right up to CPTO. So I've not only gone through this transition myself, but I've also coached a number of people through this transition and themselves. Before we dive into how you actually make that transition, and it is a big one, let's have a little look at what the kind of PM career looks like overall. And I kind of tend to think it has like four main transitions, something like that. So first of all, you start as not a PM, right? Like no one is born a PM, no one, very few graduate roles even. But the first transition you've got to make is that you've got to actually become a product manager role, become a product manager itself. And I say that because, there are very few graduate programs. There's not many associate PM roles. This is something where you usually have to transfer from another function. And all of these transitions have, share the characteristics that your role is changing fundamentally and you get caught in this kind of catch 22 of like, how do you demonstrate that you can do a role which you've never done before? Because everyone wants to hire someone who's done the job before, but if you haven't ever been given that opportunity, how can you show that you're actually capable of doing it? Good news is, if you're a product manager, you've already made one of those transitions. So PM here, the titles will vary depending on what your company calls them. But I'm including here, senior PMs, principal PMs, staff PMs, like anything where you're working directly with engineers, designers, you're building features or you're building products. You are not managing other product managers though. So the transition from here then is then up to kind of manager of PM. So that's the jump that we're talking about. It's kind of like, how do you go from being an individual contributor where you're working directly with engineers to one where you are managing other product managers? And that might be called a head of role, group product manager, lead product manager, and lots more things. The key distinction here is that you're probably not working with engineers day to day. You'll have engineering colleagues, of course, but what you're doing day to day is you are coaching a group of maybe 3 to 5 other product managers who typically all have their own cross-functional product teams that they are running. So here, your key responsibilities are going to be hiring those product managers, making sure they deliver their best work, if necessary, kind of firing them or replacing them, but making sure you kind of like your group of product teams functions as well as possible. If you go up another level, just to kind of complete this and put kind of manager of PMs in context, then you get to the stage where you are kind of running a whole function. And sometimes these are, smaller companies, these might even be blurred together, right? If you've only got 3 product teams, well, probably your head of product role is your top product person, right? But this is generally a slightly smaller jump. It's an easier jump because it's not such a big change in roles. But at this point, you are running, let's say, the whole product function or a significant proportion of the product function, and you are representing the product management on the leadership team. So I kind of divide these two up because at this kind of director, VP, SVP level, this kind of product leader level, you are just thinking at like, again, a much higher level. You might be managing anything from, 6 to 20 teams, something like this. You're going to be thinking about, because your attention is spread across so many teams, you're going to have to think about how you can work out where you're going to spend your time, like where can you have the biggest impact? And you're going to be thinking much more in terms of operating models. How do you kind of check all your teams are working effectively? And where do you need to kind of dive deeper? You may well be managing managers of other PMs as well, depending on the scale that you're at. There's one more level above this, right? Which is you become an executive. So this is the classic kind of like, you might be a CPO, chief product officer, you might be a CPTO, so a chief product and technology officer. There are a bunch of other types, chief digital officer, all sorts of things. This is then another big jump And I think it's one that's probably, yeah, I certainly kind of underestimated how big a change that was from the product leader level. Because this one from manager of PMs to product leader was relatively straightforward. And I was like, yeah, yes, it's fine. How hard can it be? Um, Going up to the executive level is actually, it's a really significant change in what your role and responsibilities are, because instead of being completely product focused, you're much more kind of general company focused. And you probably, instead of spending 80% of your time dealing with the product teams and maybe 20% of the time dealing with stakeholders, suddenly you're spending 80% of your time working with stakeholders outside of the product team, and maybe only 20% of your time actually concentrating on running the product team. Part of that is because you're going to be running multiple functions, like probably not just product management. You'll be running almost certainly design, possibly user research, maybe product analytics. You might have engineering bundled in there, customer success, or customer support sometimes. There's all sorts of other things. And you will then have to have leaders for each of those functions reporting into you. And those will all be highly competent people that can basically do the job, on autopilot. So you're going to give them like quite high level direction and let them get on with it. And then you are going to basically just keep tabs on, are they doing what they're meant to be doing? Are they struggling anywhere? And then how do you kind of point the whole organization at the right goals that you want them to be? So that's just kind of putting everything into context. So becoming a head of product, which is what I'll be calling it, like that is a major transition. Good news, you've already done a major transition, and from here you've got quite a, if you once you make that jump, you've then got quite a runway before you then make your next jump, if indeed you get that far or want to. So there's a couple of ways then that you can become a head of product. I mean, it's going to seem very obvious, right? You can get an internal promotion, or you can make a lateral move. But I kind of split it out this way because these are quite different in how you approach them. That is not to say that you have to pick between these, right? So a lot of people will effectively be pursuing both of these kind of routes in parallel, and they will just see which one pays off. It depends a little bit what is the situation at your current company and how aggressive and proactive do you want to be about getting this promotion. So let's talk a little bit about internal promotions, or rather, I might just pause there actually, because we talked about a little bit about the career path and so on. Before I dive into these two routes, I'll just pause for a moment in case anyone has any questions. Okay, I will carry on. If you're suddenly thinking of a question, that's great. Stick it in the chat, or just come off mute and ask me. So internal promotions, right? This is can be really great because you already have a job here, right? So you're not trying to get a job as well as a promotion. You've already know people at the company, so you've got a bunch of existing relationships. You've already got a reputation there, and you already know kind of about what the product team's doing, what the company is doing, how the company is placed in the market, all these sorts of things. So you've got a lot of kind of existing knowledge and things which make this a little bit easier. That said, there does need to be a role to go into. And if there is no role at your current organization, it doesn't matter how good you are never going to get promoted, right? Because companies only promote people when they have a need, not when you have a need as an individual. The other thing that is worth mentioning is that you might not be the only person who's trying to get promoted. So if you've got other peers who are also highly capable product managers, they may well be competing for similar roles as you. So this can just mean that, for example, when I was at FutureLearn, the product team had two group product managers, we called them. Each of those group product managers managed 4 product managers beneath them, and the group product managers reported into me. So we had 8 product teams overall. One of the group product managers left. That happened, I think, about 18 months after I hired them. So like not untypical for a tech company, average retention, something like 2 years, right? That gave one of those 8 product managers a chance to step up into that role. But even this actually kind of carried on after I left. So she was lining up for that role. But other people in the business wanted to make sure there were also external candidates in the mix, and internal candidates. So that's why I say you just got to be a bit careful about what is and realistic about the amount of opportunity inside your company, because that's getting mid-size startup, 8 product teams. There's one role coming up maybe every 2 years, which you're going to have to, you are not a shoe-in for, even if you're the top internal candidate. Practical things you want to do here, though. So you want to be very explicit with your manager that is your career aspiration, and you want to talk through with them how close you are to getting there, understand what the possibility of opportunities arising is, and you want to start kind of building your evidence base that you can actually do this job. Now, managers, if you think from their point of view, they're not going to guarantee anything, because they're going to want to have flexibility and options themselves, right? So they don't want to commit to giving you a promotion in 6 months' time. But if you are their top performer, they will, let's say you are, and that's why you're kind of like, right, yeah, I'm the top performer here, I'm ready for this promotion. They are going to be kind of motivated to keep you around. And they will also be aware that if they don't provide opportunities for you, you will probably start looking elsewhere. Right. And depending on the organization and your style, this is something you might want to hint at a little bit. I wouldn't recommend you be like, give me this promotion or I'm out of here, right? That's not going to go down well. But if you say, look, I really want to get made this role, I love this company, I think I'm ready for it, and you kind of know that you are, and maybe they know that as well. If there aren't going to be opportunities here, then I'd love to talk to you about kind of like, well, what's a broader career kind of plan for me, and how long does it make sense to stay at this company? I mean, I'm kind of doing that off the fly, but like something a little bit softer where you can kind of signal like, hey, if there's a glass ceiling here because there just aren't opportunities, I do recognize that everyone's going to leave sometime, and maybe this is the right time for me. Before you get to that, though, like I think it's just really important to have that conversation with your manager and make sure that they're aware that that's your ambition, and kind of pull them onto your side, like actually use them as a mentor and be like, look, I don't know how far off I am, maybe. I'd love your opinion on this. I'd love to get to this step. Why? Is that just a kind of status and salary thing? Which in my book is fine, by the way. But some people might want you to be a bit more like, no, I really want to manage people and so on. I mean, to my mind, I don't mind people being like, look, I want to get promoted because honestly, like that's the only way I'm going to get a pay rise. And that is definitely like a status step up. That's just a very honest and pragmatic way of talking about things. But again, you can probably see how that might come across as a little bit mercenary to some people. And they might want to kind of more, empathetic kind of rationale about why you want to become a manager. So just think about your audience there. But do kind of, once you start talking to your manager, you should start to get some signals about, okay, you basically ready and need to kind of like tighten a few things up, or are you like years off, or they really don't have confidence for you? Because if they start kind of really being like, well, that's a long way off, and I think you've got a lot of skills to master and so on, that can happen quite often. And that's then something where you've got to make a bit of a judgment call about how do you perceive, like, where is your true value? Your true value inside a company compared to another company, to a competitor, might be quite different. So there are people who I have been like, I will never promote you because I don't think you're good enough, who've gone straight into head of product roles at other companies. And it's the same as sort of like someone coming to me and us saying like, hey, can I have a big pay rise? I'm like, no. But they might say, well, I've got an offer to, go and work somewhere else, and they're going to pay me 10 grand more. I'm like, okay, fine, but I can replace you for your current salary. So you just need to be aware that how you perceive the situation, how your line manager perceives the situation is not going to be symmetrical. Does that make sense? Yeah, so you can be ready for a managerial role, a line manager role, and your boss might not think you're ready for it, or might just have a higher standard than they're willing to promote, higher standard they want to fill that role with than they're currently seeing in you. So again, there are no right answers there. Go and speak to your manager, see what they say, and then let's talk a bit about lateral hires, because that's your alternative, right? If you're blocked internally, you're going to start looking at other places. So benefits here are this is a much more active process and there's a lot more opportunities. However many companies are out there with head of product roles, you can go and apply to all of them, theoretically. The risks are, or the downsides are, you don't have that context, you don't have those relationships. So how do you prove your competence at a role you've never done before, right? The relationships, the kind of reputation that you have internally can be a booster or it can be a drag, and that can often be set over quite a long time period. So if you kind of weren't great in your role last year, there will probably be still stakeholders who don't completely trust you, you don't have credibility for. They're going to kind of be a drag on your ability to get promoted at your current role. Whereas if you've got a really strong reputation for shipping stuff, then obviously that's going to be in your favor. Going for a lateral move, it's a bit of a blank canvas, right? You can kind of frame yourself much more as it is. Or as you want to, I should say, and you can go and like run your job search as actively as you want. I think the thing to be aware of here is that imagine you're a VP of product, you've got a group product manager role to fill, right? If you've got that role open, then by definition, you've got a bunch of PMs who should be reporting to that person. So why are you going to hire someone external in rather than promote one of those people? Now, maybe you've got a very junior team and everyone knows that, and even the PMs internally know that, that's fine. But if you've got a more balanced team, then you're going to want to be kind of ideally making those promotions internally, because that is like really good for motivation and morale inside your current team, because people see that they've got a longer career path inside the company if they can get promoted up to head of role. So the thing to be aware of here is like to get that role somewhere else, like when you haven't got any management experience, like you've got this kind of, you've got to show that you're really good at what you do, and yet better than any of the internal candidates, and you still haven't actually done that role yourself. It's definitely possible. I mean, I'd say effectively this is what I did, right? I went from it happened, as often it happens like by degrees, right? So I went from a games company called Wooga in Germany, where I was running a single team, but I was line managing the engineers and designers. I then went to a company where I had a director of product role, but I was really sort of working as an individual contributor in 0 to 1 products. And then I went to Depop, where I had a head of product role, but then I was doing like 0 individual contributor work, and I was managing a team of 4 product managers. So that was a lateral hire. How did that happen? Well, it certainly helped. I probably had a director of product title. It helped that I was clearly like a very skilled product manager. I could kind of like present myself as that, and I could talk about businesses I'd built and products I'd launched. And I also had a fairly big network internally in London. So practical steps, like you're still going to want to build this kind of evidence of competence, like whether you're giving that internally or whether you're going to do that, give that to someone else externally for a lateral move. That is going to you're going to want to have that. So what do I mean by this? I mean like a list of achievements and case studies where you can demonstrate that you can effectively lead a team. And I'll talk a little bit more about what things you need to cover in just a moment. The other things that are worth doing build your network, right? So connect with people, go to meetups, try and connect with people who might be hiring managers, frankly. So VPs, directors of product. Those people are often hiring, right? If the average kind of person in a tech role is in role for like 2 years, something like that, and they're managing like multiple people, like 2, 3 people, and then it takes however many months, 3, 4 months to hire someone, they're probably like hiring 50% of the time. So don't go and just like meet those people. Don't just go and ask them, do you have a job? Because it's like, no, end of conversation, or yes, apply through the website. Go and actually develop a proper relationship with them by asking them about how they got to where they are. Go and ask them genuine questions about things you find interesting about them, right? And then kind of weave into the conversation that, oh, you're looking for a job. I say active search here, like people who are really kind of proactive about finding a job are generally running like a pipeline, almost like a sales pipeline to find that job. So they're sourcing new roles, like both through LinkedIn, personal networks, job boards, other sources. They're then categorizing these. They're almost like scoring those jobs by saying like, how good a fit is this with what I want based on the role, the company, the location, everything else. And then they are applying for those roles, giving them as much attention as their prioritization sort of deserves. So, your dream role comes up at Anthropic, let's say, great. Well, maybe you spend like 2 or 3 days prepping for that before you even make an application, or you apply like multiple different ways. Whereas some startup you've never heard of is also looking for a head of product role, but sounds like it might be fun. Great. Well, maybe you spend like 2 hours and then you apply, right? So you're kind of like weighting how much you spend, how much time you invest on each application based on how much it matches your the jobs you're looking for. Okay, so those are 2 different paths. Again, any questions, just dump them in the chat. I'm going to talk a little bit now about what you need to demonstrate. So beyond being a good product manager, what are the kind of characteristics that VPs will be looking for if they're hiring heads of product? Firstly, just to be really clear on this, hey, you need to be able to do the PM role really, really well. That is absolute table stakes. And so that's not just you can talk a good game on discovery, it's that you have multiple case studies where you've shipped products or shipped features that have driven significant commercial outcomes. So this is not kind of improving conversion rate by 0.5%, unless you can put like a £10 million, value on that. It's not kind of like doubling the social media followers. It's like real kind of commercial results. You've won contracts, you've opened markets. Like you want to make these as commercial as possible so that people have that kind of faith that you see the world in kind of not product way, but in a kind of more commercial way. Second one, I call this exec empathy. You can toe the party line, right? So you reduce stress for senior leaders rather than you add to it. Third one then is people management. I put this actually quite far down the list in terms of, this is the kind of stuff that you think about, right? You can hire, coach, and fire PMs, you get great results out of your team. And fourth one I put on here is your kind of like operating system, systems thinking. You can set up the team structure, you can set the meetings and the process needed to run that team. So people management, I think about your kind of one-to-one interactions with PMs. Your operating system is like, how do you run the kind of whatever number of teams you've got, your 4 teams. Let's talk about each of those in a little bit more detail. So I mentioned this before, like it's a catch-22. How do you demonstrate you can do a job that you've never done before? I kind of think of it a little bit like this, as in, there's a big like jump coming. How do you get across the jump? You get kind of closer and closer to the edge till you're sort of like right on the edge of it. You get as much evidence that you can do this as possible, kind of reach out as far as you can. And then you get lucky at some point and you kind of like, you grab onto the ledge And once you're there, it's probably still going to be a bit of a shock, what a jump that is. But then you're going to work like crazy and you've made it over the chasm. Like the hard work is done. So specifically, let's talk about delivering results. So yeah, your team should be shipping often. You should be creating features that unambiguously create commercial value. Stakeholders should recognize this. You should be able to talk about this in case studies to, or case study equivalents to stakeholders and external people. And I say if you don't feel you're there yet, or don't feel you have like a big backlog of really commercial features or commercial results to fall back on, then the things to do are to go and build your relationships with commercial stakeholders, find out what their priorities are, and keep them happy because they will want you to deliver commercial results, right? And don't get too hung up on the idealized product processes. This definitely happened to me at some point where I was like, I'm amazing at product management. I can do all this stuff. And people were like, great, so what have you shipped? And I'd be like, yeah, but my discovery is amazing. They'd be like, yeah, but what have you shipped? So, and I was like, yeah, I mean, I kind of shipped this thing. I mean, it wasn't great results. I mean, or it's not kind of that hard, easy to communicate it. I mean, it made sense at the time. If you find yourself kind of talking this way, yeah, just focus on like the achievements you've got, your log of achievements. You're kind of like, yeah, those commercial case studies are the things that you should focus on. Next one, then, exec empathy. So this one I mentioned because if I'm a VP and I'm thinking about promoting someone into from an IC role into a manager role, like you don't want to be in this position where you're kind of like, oh, it's like us and them kind of leadership and everybody else, like all the ICs, right? But if you do think that way, like then the managers, they're definitely on your side because they are now management. So you're not going to promote someone if they are not taking that kind of like management view, which means they're still going to kind of contest questions, like, or kind of like challenge leadership on direction, process, all this sort of stuff. But they're going to do that in private more often than not. And when it comes to actually kind of speaking to the teams to get things done, they're going to kind of be like, this is the company decision. This is what the CEO has decided. This is the right way forward. And this is why. So even if they don't believe in it, they're going to be able to articulate like clearly why the company is moving in a particular way, why it's making certain decisions, and they are going to sell that decision to other people. So when you're still an IC, that means things like you kind of recognize like when there's time to disagree and when it's time to kind of really commit. And I say really commit, like everyone knows about disagreeing and committing. But most people will kind of begrudgingly say like, fine, we'll do that then. And then we'll kind of like shove it as far down their to-do list as possible and try and kind of silently kill it. That is not disagreeing and committing, right? Disagreeing and committing is like, you make your case, you realize the decision's not going with you, you'd be like, that's fine. Clearly we're going in this direction. Let's go. And then you put everything you can, like your entire kind of brain power, reputation, the resources at your disposal to making that decision a success. That is quite different. But again, think about it from the VP's point of view. Like every time they have to make a difficult decision, just like every day, basically, then one of the things they have to do is figure out like, well, what are the communications? How am I gonna kind of like make sure the team buys into this? And if you're someone that they can talk to and be like, look, we've got to do this. What do you think the sensitivities are for the rest of the team and how do we sell it to them? That makes you someone that they actively want to be kind of like speaking to because they know that you can help them out. If they know that when they tell you something they know is going to be unpopular, you're going to poke holes all over it and they're going to have to spend a load of energy convincing you about it, that actually increases their stress. So you want to be very much a kind of someone who can make execs' lives easier, not someone who can cause them additional stress. Oh, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Let me have a look at those. Yeah, okay. So someone here is asking, at a product level, how do you balance being close enough to execution um, while still having the credibility, close enough to execution to have credibility without getting dragged into IC work? So this is always one of the tricky things, is like people getting sucked into IC work. And I think the occasion you have to do that, right? Especially as a head of product, is like, if you're running 4 teams, one of your product managers like leaves very suddenly, you're going to have to fill that gap. Um, that said, if you are really a good enough product manager, you should be able to fill that gap like without working 100% of your time. I mean, and maybe you're not going to do it quite as well as like a full-time PM person would be doing, but the more senior you are, generally the more efficient you are. So you can probably cover that role with 50% of your time. That's going to give you, you're still going to have 50% of your time to backfill that role and handle all your other product managers. So you've just got to make sure that you always reserve that additional time for sort of getting out of the hole, getting away from the AIC work and getting back up to the management level. At any management level, if you do not have enough time, that's a really strong indicator that the people reporting into you are not strong enough, or you're just trying to do too much, right? So I think about it that way. Um, and then Robert's asking, in what sense would you say is it possible to shape the delivery of results section if you're working in a company that is rather sales led or run on CEO feeling? I think in that sense, it's in some ways it's much easier, right? Because you could be like, well, sales asked us to build this thing and we built this thing and then it went and we won a couple of deals, right? So it can be very, very linked to commercial results if you're in a kind of waterfall or top down organization. Where you'll get challenged by people in interviews is if they say, okay, but whose idea was that? And if they're looking for someone that's more strategic thinking. And so that's where you've got to be thinking about, okay, actually, sales had this request. And what you want to be able to say is like, look, yes, they came up with the idea for that, but this is how we kind of transformed it from something that probably would have failed into something that succeeded because we figured out that actually this was a scalable use case if we added this extra thing, or actually the solution they suggested was like completely unusable until we did user testing. So you need to show how you're kind of still adding value and not just kind of executing the orders of someone else. Okay, let's go back to this exec empathy. So yeah, if you don't think you're as strong on this yet as you should be, then things to work on would be understanding when and how to voice your concerns and when to commit. So like almost think of that as two phases. You can be quite direct with people. If you're CEO or a VP says, "Hey, I want you to ship this feature," you can be like, "Right, is this up for discussion or is this something that you've decided?" And if they're like, "Well, we can, you can challenge it," great. Be like, "Great, because these are my concerns." Yeah, 1, 2, 3. And if they're like, "No, we've decided," be like, "Not a problem. I'll crack on." Right. So even just kind of starting in that mindset, I think goes a long way to making you seem like much more like you're not going to get in the way of things. Like you're all on the same team, right? So how do you just help the company get to the best results, right? Is that by it's not by challenging them every single time. It's by knowing like when is the time to kind of critique their proposal so you can make it stronger, and when is the time just to be like, well, we've all got a slightly different opinion on this, but this is the plan we're going with. Let's execute it. I'd say like linked to that as a third point of, practice a company first mindset, not a me first mindset. So you want to get out of thinking, oh, this is really inconvenient for me, this process, or, this promotion would be really good for me. Like you want to be like, look, the company needs to promote someone into this role because when they don't, bad things happen, teams aren't aligned, there's no joined up strategy. By the way, I could do that role. But even if you don't want me, like someone else should be doing it, right? So any problem, like any kind of reason why even if you're advancing your own interests, you've got to frame it from like the company overall. This is why it's a good idea for the company. And that has to be like a genuine thing. It can't be just a kind of veneer kind of spread over like what is good for you. And we talked a little bit about this kind of understanding leaders' priorities and stresses. Okay. People management. Oh, wait a sec. I've switched these around. I've obviously kind of changed. So this is actually all the notes for operating systems. So operating systems, what do I mean by that? Do I mean that? No, I haven't switched these around. No, this is right. Sorry. Obviously, when you're a manager, you're going to go and have to hire people, right? Sorry, I am so confused by my slides. I'm going to talk about both these things. It'll be all fine. You can divide them up into two different categories as you wish. Right. So I am going to talk about operating systems first. Like when you're a manager, you need to know like when am I doing my staff meetings? How am I actually auditing, reviewing the work that my team's doing? Because imagine like you're not going to be in 4 stand-ups every day if you're managing 4 teams. You might be in like 1 stand-up every week of each team. That's a way of doing it. But how do you actually know, like when you're not in the stand-ups and you're not in the sprint planning, how those teams are doing? Like that is something you've got to figure out. That's not something you can directly show, but typically the people who are really good at this are already starting to think about, show kind of like systems thinking. And that looks like they already create really good artifacts. Yeah, artifacts, PRDs, strategies, backlogs, right? They already kind of think about like, oh, actually, if I've got that, I could turn it into a template and other people could use it, and they're starting to share it with peers. And they will give constructive feedback, like again, from the VP's point of view on how process works. And not on a kind of, I'm going to complain that we have to do more reporting, but in a kind of like, hey, I know at the moment we're filling in this reporting sheet. Actually, I think if we do it this way, that's going to cut a meeting that's going to save like everyone half an hour a week, and you're still going to get the results that you want or the visibility that you want, right? So they're able to provide that kind of input. These bullet points down here definitely refer to something else. I'll come back to that. So on the hiring side or the people management side, what does this look like? So again, this is the bit where I talk about, are you hiring people? Are you coaching them? Can you fire people? You're not going to be responsible for that as an IC, but people who are ready for that jump typically are getting involved with hiring a lot, and they give really good feedback, and they give notes that are insightful, they're comprehensive. So these are typically the people where, as a VP, I'd be like, oh, I need to hire 3 PMs or 2 PMs, right? Great, let's set up a bunch of interviews. I'll go and get HR to do that. Like you should be the person who's doing the first round interview with all of those candidates. And basically like, no one gets passed unless you think they should be a good hire, right? And you can evidence that really well because you've got a really robust interview guide, and you ask the same questions, and you've got calibrated responses and all this sort of stuff. You just do it to a really high level. The other thing that you might be doing is getting paired with more junior colleagues to provide them with extra coaching. So-and-so is just transferred from marketing. They're going to be a PM now. They're not quite getting this whole like how to manage their engineers effectively. Can you spend a bit more time with them? Right. So if you're getting pulled into these kind of like pseudo management roles, that's a really good thing. And maybe even something that you could volunteer to help out with. So yeah, I guess I don't know. I've kind of flipped these bullet points, unfortunately. So on the people side, how do you get there? Volunteer for all the management stuff and develop relationships with HR. As in, if you're involved in a hiring process, have a coffee with the HR person. Like, what's going to make it easy for them? What are they looking for? How do they think about this? Like, that is someone because especially, HR is going to talk to each other, and they are going to have a say in who gets promoted to, management roles. On the operations side, or the kind of operating system thinking, this is what I talked about. Turn your best artifacts into templates, turn your best PRDs into a template, right? share it with others if that's useful. Like find out, try and spot areas where other people are struggling or there's a bit of confusion. Oh, we're going to do OKRs again. It was a complete mess last time. Great. Actually, do you have a template that everyone else could use? Or could you find, could you even find someone else's like template of what is the best thing to do? Right. And look for opportunities to kind of, prune process and keep it streamlined while still, being effective. Okay. A couple more principles, then I'm going to finish up. So I think three of these. Firstly, really great if you can find a mentor or maybe two or three mentors. So someone who is one or two steps further on their career, who can provide a bit of advice, who can help you think through your opportunities, like should I stay? Should I go somewhere else? I've got two offers. Which one do I pick? And may be able to make you some intros, but I'd say that's kind of like much less common. But really can just kind of like provide you with independent career advice when your line manager should be able to give you career advice, but might not be completely independent. Secondly, if you want to become a head of product, be ambitious. I think one of the strongest correlations with how far people get in their careers is how ambitious they are. And the people that I know who've got promoted very quickly have been very active about how they manage their career. They're always looking for roles where they can maximize their learning, their achievement, and they are always kind of making this question about like, okay, should I stay? Should I go? That's a very active thing they're always thinking about. Finally, like, have a plan. I mean, this transition, because it's one of those bigger transitions, like this might take you 2 or 3 years to make. Like, even if you think you're ready, like it just might take that amount of time to find the right opportunities and kind of go through the hiring processes and blah, 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 or get kind of, make the case internally. Have a career development plan. Have regular check-ins with yourself, like every 3 months, every 6 months, like work out what you should be working on, like make it a kind of not just a vague thing that you're trying to do, but put some structure around it as well. And that obviously kind of feeds into these two, discuss that with your mentors, think about ways you can accelerate your plan if you want to. So just to wrap up then, if you want to go, I've chatted a lot. Sorry, I was hoping to kind of like leave a bit more time for questions but a few things that you might find useful, which I just wanted to mention. There's obviously on Hustle Badger a ton of resources and playbooks for just about everything. And that's both at the IC level, but also at the management level. So if you're thinking about how you can develop an operating system, checking on other teams, we've got a bunch of playbooks and resources on that are well worth checking out. Secondly, I talk a lot more about kind of leading without authority in this talk on YouTube. I mean, there's a bunch of other presentations that might be useful as well. I kind of flag this one, leading without authority, because I think it talks a lot about kind of building credibility, about that sort of like exec empathy. I probably call it something else. So I think it kind of pairs this talk quite nicely. And if you're thinking like, this is great, but this isn't going to happen at my company, how do I find another job? We've got a really, really good job hunting course. It's part of the membership, but a bunch of people have messaged us having done that course. It's like a 6-week on-demand course, saying they found roles, and just talks through that kind of process of running an active search and building your network in a bit more detail. I'm going to stop there. If you've got other questions, please do let me know.
Just one question, and thank you very much. That was super, super insightful. As someone who's scaling and hiring now, I wanted to just understand if you've been in a situation where you're the key person on your team, um, and you have become a bottleneck for others. And so sort of both from a IC and from a product level, how do you coach people around that particular issue without causing a complete political, I've been like a storm. So again, saying, I think you said it so nicely, like saying no, and if you're saying no, and but then also committing fully as well. So that was that's what sort of brought that question for me. I don't know if that made it clear.
Do you mean if you're running like a big team and you need like more support with, potentially hiring a junior product manager to help you out, or do you mean like you've just got too many inbound requests and you need to say no to some of them?
Yeah, it's like saying no to some of them or just managing that. But
Yeah.
in a I guess not the IC level, as in a head of product head level.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, look, I think one of the things you've got to become capable of talking about at that management level is like, yeah, what can you do with the resources that you've got? And so I think the most effective way of cutting down on inbound requests is having a really strong product strategy. Um, so yeah, because effectively, like from a CFO's point of view, your product team is an investment that you're making, right? It's just like a big line item in salary. So you're saying like, right, we're going to make this investment in product, and we think it's going to make this change to the P&L or to the, over time. Fine. So your strategy should say, this is the commercial outcome you're going to get from all the different work we're going to do. And that is also the kind of the best use of this investment that the company is making in product. But you're obviously going to share that with other people, get their perspective, and so on. But if you've got broad alignment that your strategy is a good one, then it means any inbound request either has to have like, brand new information that changes the strategy, or it's not as an effective use of the time that you've got, of the investment that you've got. So then you are in a kind of much better position to say like, I'd love to do this. It sounds like a good idea. Unfortunately, we're working on a bunch of great ideas, which I think are going to be higher return on investment. And you can also sort of like, if you give enough context about how you came up with your strategy, because it should be evidenced, it should have business cases in rather than just be like, well, we think these are the top ideas. Then you can also establish some very clear guidelines for requests that will and won't be accepted. So you can say, look, everything that we're working on effectively has, makes a £500,000 impact over, with a quarter's work. So if you're suggesting that we work on something for a single deal that's going to bring in an extra 50K and that's going to take us a month, clearly does not add up. This is not going to work. Right. So you kind of establish, your order of magnitude might be like completely different, right? If that I'm talking like, small company, but so that's a good way, because then if you can set that out, then people just, they don't bother kind of giving you requests. They're like, oh, I've got a great idea, but actually I just know it's not going to be big enough for you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Super. Look, I will wrap up there. I've dropped some links in the chat where you can find the recording for this, connect with me on LinkedIn, sign up for more talks. I will do a quick follow-up email as well with some of those links I shared on the final slide. So the resources for Hustle Badger, the other talk on leading without authority, and the course, the job hunting course. Have a great evening, morning, rest of the day, depending on where you are. And hopefully see you soon.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.